Do you see this? Look at this. You see that? It's 36 degrees here. Just kill me right now. Kill me right now. It's so hot. It's so hot that it's snowing in certain parts of the U.S. But no, it is 36 degrees here. I'm dying. I am dying. Sorry, stress is kind of getting me now. I did not mean to go this long without making a video. I never mean to go this long without making a video. But you know how it is. Sometimes it's hot. Sometimes you can make a lot of videos. Sometimes you feel good and you're in the zone, and then sometimes you don't. And this is one of those instances where I definitely don't. But it doesn't mean that I don't want to make videos. And so I thought I'd sit down and just talk about some books that I read recently. Nothing big, nothing significant in that, but you know, it's something. And the unifying theme with these books is that they're all classics in a way, and they're all short. So these are short classics that I read recently. I'm going to put them in order of when I read them. So the first one that I read was Agnes Grey by Anne Bronte, which, I'll be honest, disappointed me a little bit. I'm not the biggest fan of Agnes Grey, unfortunately. I am, and I've talked about it before, but I am a huge fan of Jane Eyre. I also really liked Wuthering Heights, so I was hoping I was really going to enjoy Agnes Grey, but I ended up not loving it. It felt like it was just kind of going through the motions to me. Like it was almost perfunctorily hitting certain beats that you would expect for a story like Agnes Grey to hit. But it wasn't doing it with any sort of particular intentionality or conviction, I felt, that would make it particularly interesting. The story felt really lopsided to me as well, like there was attention placed on things that ended up not being that important. The story also felt predictable, like I knew where it was going before it ever got there. Because again, it just kind of was, kind of paint by numbers in a way. I don't know. The issue is never for me that a story is predictable. Like, I'm never sitting there trying to guess where a story is going to go. I let the story just take me where it's going to take me. And I'm never trying to guess where it's going to go, even if it is obvious. So predictability is never really that big of an issue for me. But it's when something is pretty predictable and then also it's going between the sort of conventional beats that you would expect in a way that doesn't feel like it's doing it with any amount of, there's nothing unique about it, there's nothing special about it. Again, there's no particular intentionality behind it, and it just feels like it's just doing it out of a sort of a storytelling obligation. And that I don't really like. And it's something that I felt defined my experience, at least this time through, with Agnes Grey, which was pretty unfortunate. I would have liked to like it a lot more, but I have to be honest, that was my first time experience with Agnes Grey, and it wasn't the most positive one ever. But it's short. I didn't spend too much time with it. I just kind of pushed through to the end, ended up not loving it, and moving on to the next one, which was The Torrents of Spring by Turgenev, which I liked a lot. I thought it was pretty good. I'm not the biggest Turgenev fan, but I did like The Torrents of Spring. It was a book, and I'm noticing this a lot with Turgenev. It was a book that had, a very obvious sort of moral aspect to it. It's one of those stories which, at this point, I feel like falls into its own category of classic, a category of classic in which you have a main character who makes a series of unfortunate decisions that puts them by the end of the book in a really bad place. And you're supposed to basically learn learn from this character's mistakes, and not make them yourself, which is a cool category. It's not my favorite category, but it's definitely a category that I can get have some fun reading experiences with, and that was definitely the case with The Torrents of Spring. It was definitely a story that had me interested from beginning to end. It's also short, like all of these books, so it doesn't overstay its welcome, though I do think it drags a little bit at the beginning. But there's a certain point where the story shifts, a character gets introduced, and the whole thing really sort of clicks into place, and it makes a lot of sense. And I think it's propelled forward by a really great momentum after in especially the second half. So I would recommend it. I thought it was good. I have a little bit of reservation with Turgenev in general, just because I feel like there is always a distance between myself and whatever story he's telling, which I don't really love. You know, the best things that I've read, the things that I love in terms of, you know, the best reading experiences that I've had, I'm fully immersed in what I'm reading. You know, I lose myself in what I'm reading. I just become fully invested in that story, and I have never been able to do that with Turgenev, including in this instance with the Torrents of Spring. There was definitely a distance between myself and, you know, that story as well, which, you know, prevents me from like fully loving it, fully, you know, absolutely being swept up by the experience of reading it, but I did enjoy it. And so, you know, I would recommend it. But then after that, I read The Sorrows of Young Werther, and I did not like it at all. This was definitely my least favorite of the bunch, the one I would least like to go back to. Largely because our main character, young Werther, is not a character who I was particularly interested in at all. His plight was not one that I had much sympathy for. He was just a character in a story that I thought was treading a lot of water and did not do anything particularly moving for me at all. He's hung up on a woman who is destined to get married to somebody else. This is obviously a classic situation that you would, you know, many great stories have been sort of, you know, put characters in this predicament. But unfortunately, in this case, I was not invested at all in the story, in the least. I did not care about young Werther, and I did not care about the situation that he was in much at all. I am fully willing to admit that there might be some personal bias there, but I just did not feel like the story was working for me on any level. I felt like there were these sort of philosophical digressions in the book that ultimately were also completely uninteresting to me. I do not mind philosophical digressions in my books, but I feel like a philosophical digression in a book should ultimately carry some weight within the story, as in the conversation that's being had impacts the decisions that the characters make, which I guess you could make the claim that that's what happens in The Sorrows, but I did not feel like there was much point in a lot of what I was reading in the book, and I did not feel like what there was a point behind really registered to me in any substantial way. So I just thoroughly did not like it. I usually, you know, don't. I usually try and be a little bit more diplomatic, but I just did not. I did not, especially when I got to the ending. I was just like, this sucked. So that one's not for me. I did not enjoy that. If you enjoyed it, let me know why. I will definitely read why somebody enjoyed that, but I didn't at all. But I went from that to another book that is sort of renowned for its sadness, and that is Ethan Frome by Edith Wharton. And that one I liked. That one I really liked. Ethan Frome worked for me so much better. Ethan Frome is a character who's in a position that I think is so much more interesting. He is a character who, because of the sort of, situation that he's in, he is actually backed against a wall in a much more effective and interesting way than Werther is. In The Sorrows of Young Werther, in Ethan Frome, our eponymous character, Ethan, is in a situation where he cannot extricate himself cleanly and get away with what he wants to get away with in a way that will make himself and everyone else happy. And he knows that. So he is in a situation where he is stuck where he is. He's stuck emotionally, but he's also stuck financially. He's got extreme financial difficulties, which, relatable. So there's a lot of things about his character that I can sympathize with and empathize with. And then what ends up happening is that I was way more, swept up in his story, way more invested in his story than I ever was with young Werther. In a situation that's similar, which is, a kind of unrequited love situation. It's not totally in the case in Ethan Frome because, he is in love with somebody who loves him back. He just can't be with them. And that's, really interesting. And the story itself was really interesting. And it has a kind of crazy ending. I'm going to admit I didn't love totally the ending. I liked it more on a storytelling level than I did on like a personal level. I was like, wow, that's an interesting way of ending your story. I thought it was really cool. I thought it was an interesting decision. I don't know if I was like totally bought in emotionally on it, but outside of just the very ending of it, the entire book, that's a book that swept me out. That was a book that swept me out for sure. And I was way, way more invested in Ethan Frome than I was in anything else on this list so far. It's my first Edith Wharton. I, believe it or not, have not read The Age of Innocence yet, so that's something that's high on my list. That and Little Women are the two classics that I have not read yet that are really, really high on my list of priorities to get to. So hopefully I'll be reading those at some point soon. But right now, Ethan Frome was my favorite, and that was until I read Pushkin. I read Eugene Onegin for the first time. And wow, what a book. Holy smokes. I don't really know what to say about it because this is sort of my first time tentative, furtive, totally ignorant, don't know what's going on, fish out of water read through of Eugene Onegin. I mean, there's a pretty high barrier of entry to Eugene Onegin, and like another sort of book that's kind of similar in the sense that they're both, poems and languages other than in English. It reminded me a little bit of the Divine Comedy, where it's like there is a barrier of entry to this in terms of language, in terms of the structure of the story, in terms of the culture in which it was written being very different from obviously the situation that I'm reading it now. And that was ultimately what really turned me off of reading Eugene Onegin for this long. I've actually read things about its translation process before I even ended up reading it, and it was reading things about its translation process that turned me off of reading it, because it is one of those books that is one of those things that just gets people to learn Russian, because it's magical. I mean, it just is. There's something so enticing and interesting about it. But you just know, you feel it on every single page and basically every single word that you're reading a translation. You never forget that you're reading a translation. It does not work in any other language than Russian as well as it does in Russian. And you could say that about, maybe anything, but I think it's especially the case with Russian. And I'm certainly not the only person to say that. I've read many, many people who have said the same thing, not least of which being Nabokov, who infamously made a 3-volume translation of it, which is impenetrable and horrible. But the point was, I was turned off about reading it for so long because I did not want to. Because I was just burnt out on all of the discourse about how it's untranslatable and how there's really no way to render this Russian in English, and everything that you do in terms of that translation is going to be just a poor imitation of what's there in the original. But I'm happy to report that I picked a translation basically at random. It's the James Phelan translation, which is a highly regarded translation in English. I have not done a large study of all these different translations, so I cannot give you a recommendation based on some sort of, extensive research on the topic. His translation is well received by certain people who are not, stingy about this, or stooges, I guess, completely pretentious about the, philosophy of translation or whatever. It is well received, but certainly it's not the only translation, and I'm sure there are many translations that do a really great job as well. I picked that one basically at random. I really enjoyed it, so I would recommend it. And what I learned in this first read through, and what I guess I'll just try and convey here, is that while it is apparent that you are reading a translation, and while I'm sure it's not as rendered as well in English as it is in its original, it's still a wonderful reading experience. It just is. It's a wonderful reading experience. It's totally unique. It's, Pushkin goes on these really interesting, digressions, and he admonishes himself even at times in those digressions and promises, okay, I'm going to stop digressing here. And, he goes, it's just a fascinating way of telling a story. The story itself is great, but it's really one of those instances in which it's a celebration of storytelling, which is very interesting. And I think part of the reason why so much of the focus is on the language of Eugene Onegin, in the sense that when you're reading it, you are interested in the way that Pushkin is telling the story and the fact that he's celebrating storytelling as this sort of amazing experience that we can, all participate in as humans. I loved it. I loved it for that. The story itself even, supports that because it's just a kind of tiny slice of these people's lives. It's not some great big epic in that sense. It doesn't follow generations of people in some way. It's just a sort of slice of life for these characters at particular times in their lives. And because of that, it puts that emphasis on just the magic of storytelling. And even in a translation, it's conveyed very well. Even in a translation, it's conveyed very well. So that was my favorite thing that I read recently. I really enjoyed my experience with Eugene Onegin. And like I said, this was my first tentative, furtive read-through of it. I'm going to be reading it again, and hopefully in different translations. And maybe at some point, I'll be able to have a better grasp of the story overall. But even at the stage that I'm in right now, I really enjoyed it. After that would definitely be Ethan Frome. And then after that would be the Torrents of Spring. I would put Agnes Grey next, and then right at the bottom would be the Charles of Young Werther. So that's my list. That's my order, and that's what I have to say about those classics. So I'd love to hear what your opinions are on those classics in the comments, and hopefully I'll be able to come back with another video a little bit sooner. Thanks.